On 16th March 37 AD, the life of Tiberius, a name that struck fear into the hearts of many, came to an end on the island of Capri. News of the ruler's demise spread like wildfire through Rome, reaching the city's most distant corners with astonishing speed. 2 decades of oppression concluded, and Romans poured onto the streets to express their joy. Jubilant crowds adorned with flowers chanted greetings, and tears of relief shone on many faces. Hopes were pinned on Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus, the young offspring of the renowned general Germanicus. In the eyes of the populace, this heralded a revival of the Augustan era. Rome yearned for a young, charismatic leader with heroic blood flowing through his veins to guide the state. The new princeps's arrival in the capital was triumphant. He was greeted as "our darling, our chick, little Germanicus." The contrast with Tiberius' harsh rule was striking. Caligula seemed like a long-awaited dawn after a prolonged night. However, Rome was yet unaware that behind the radiant smile lay a tragic soul hardened in the gloomy atmosphere of Capri. The emperor, so enthusiastically welcomed that day, would soon become known as one of the most sinister figures in the history of the Roman Empire. In the year 12 AD, in the heart of the military camp stretched along Germany's Rhine frontier, a baby was born who was destined to inscribe his name, or rather his nickname, into the annals of history: Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus. His father, Germanicus, was adored by the Roman legionaries, a victor of countless battles, and seemingly destined by fate to inherit popular love and adoration. His mother, Agrippina the Elder, was a direct descendant of Augustus himself. With such a lineage, it seemed Gaius was fated for greatness. However, it was not his official name, but an episode from his childhood that brought him true fame. Dressed in miniature armor and tiny soldier's boots, the boy became a kind of army mascot. The legionaries, touched by how he marched among them like a miniature version of his illustrious father, affectionately began to call him Caligula, which means little boots. In those days, no one could have imagined that this innocent nickname, born in an atmosphere of laughter and camaraderie, would eventually become a symbol of terror, excessive indulgence, and madness. A tragedy overshadowed by suspicion. Germanicus stood out among Rome's generals. He was the embodiment of the empire's glory. His triumphs in the Germanic lands restored Roman confidence, which had been shaken after the crushing defeat in the Teutoburg forest. Thanks to his outstanding charisma, he was seen by the people as Tiberius's most likely successor. In 19 AD, while leading troops in the east, Germanicus unexpectedly fell ill in Antioch. He was struck by fever, convulsions began, and his body weakened with terrifying speed. Germanicus's death plunged the empire into shock. An already terrible event was compounded by sinister rumors. Was it not poisoning? Suspicions fell on Gnaeus Calpurnius Piso, the governor of Syria, who was accused of carrying out Tiberius's secret will. Despite a lack of evidence, this version took firm root in the public consciousness. Many claimed that the emperor feared his heir's popularity. For young Gaius, his father's death was a terrible blow. Germanicus was not just a general, but a symbol of Roman valor and justice. After his death, the family faced persecution and suspicion. Agrippina, Gaius's mother, did not believe the incident was accidental. She was convinced that Tiberius had ordered Germanicus's assassination. It was then that young Caligula learned an important lesson. In Rome, power is not inherited, it must be seized. After the untimely death of Germanicus, Agrippina the elder, consumed by insatiable grief and righteous anger, did not seek solace, but craved vengeance. Every word and gesture of hers accused Tiberius of the villainous murder of Rome's beloved general. This struggle was not only political, but deeply personal. However, in an empire permeated by an atmosphere of suspicion, such unwavering persistence posed a mortal danger. The emperor saw Agrippina and her offspring as a direct threat to his absolute power. Gradually, favorable attention turned into ruthless persecution. In 29 AD, a tragedy of unimaginable proportions erupted. Agrippina was seized on false charges of treason and exiled to the island of Pandateria, a bleak and deserted place where she spent the last years of her life, consumed by hunger and despair. Her elder sons, Nero and Drusus, did not escape a similar fate. They were imprisoned, subjected to brutal torture, and executed. Within a decade, Germanicus's lineage was virtually annihilated. Only Gaius, a young man known by the nickname Caligula, survived. He was just 17 when he witnessed the demise of his mother and brothers at the hands of the system meant to protect them. This traumatic experience forever altered his worldview. Rome appeared to him not as a cradle of greatness, but as an arena of betrayals, where only the most cunning survived. In 31 AD, Caligula's fate took a fateful turn when Tiberius summoned him to the island of Capri, a picturesque natural haven transformed into the emperor's private residence and an arena of depravity. This paradise in the Bay of Naples became a stage for intrigue, orgies, and sophisticated psychological games. Tiberius surrounded himself on Capri with philosophers steeped in vice, fawning courtiers, and executioners disguised as servants. In this closed world, power knew no bounds, and morality was trampled. For 6 years, young Gaius lived alongside the aging emperor, who found pleasure in humiliating people. Capri became an academy of cruelty for Caligula, where he absorbed every lesson. He realized that human dignity was fragile, like clay, that sex could be a tool of manipulation, and that fear was a more effective weapon than a sword. Particularly unsettling was his ability to adapt. While other courtiers lost their minds or fell into despair, Caligula thrived, hiding behind a mask of obedience and charm. He smiled, served, applauded, and silently absorbed all the dark knowledge, omens of fate. Suetonius, the chronicler of past years, recounts Tiberius's thoughtful words, "I am rearing a viper for the Roman people." A sinister prophecy resonated in these words. The lonely child, deprived of a family home, gradually transformed into a young man who understood that boundless power knows no moral or ethical constraints. On a March day in 37 AD, at a villa nestled in the greenery of Capri, Tiberius departed this world. Historical chronicles are not unanimous in their accounts. Some claim death was due to natural causes, while others blame Caligula, whose impatience reached its limit, ordering the emperor's life to be ended with a pillow. Be that as it may, with the first rays of sun, the old ruler fell silent forever, and the Roman Empire found itself under the sway of a young man barely past his 24th birthday. News of Tiberius' death swept through the city like wildfire. After long years of fear and oppression under Tiberius' rule, the Roman people were seized with jubilation. Caligula was no stranger to them. He was the son of the beloved Germanicus, a boy who grew up among soldiers, a successor to a glorious lineage. In his image, people saw hope for a revival of past glory. When he entered Rome as emperor, the streets were overflowing with jubilant crowds. They greeted him with affectionate nicknames, our pet, our hope, our darling. Soldiers who had served under his father could not hold back tears, seeing the son of the celebrated general become Caesar. No emperor since Augustus had been granted such a triumph. Augustus. In the first months of his reign, Caligula demonstrated balanced and thoughtful decisions. He freed prisoners of conscience, restored illegally alienated property, and organized lavish, unforgettable games. He presented himself to the people as an accessible and humane ruler, almost as a long-awaited savior. Rome enthusiastically believed in the dawn of a new, brilliant golden age. However, behind this attractive facade lay the sinister shadow of Capri. The snake, nurtured by Tiberius himself, was preparing to bear its venomous fangs. Initially, Caligula seemed to fully justify the hopes placed upon him. Rome, exhausted by Tiberius's oppressive silence, was charmed by the young, charismatic, and generous prince. He proclaimed amnesty for those persecuted for political reasons, returned confiscated assets, and opened the city's gates for grand public festivities. The circus and amphitheater once again came alive with thrilling performances, gladiatorial contests, and spectacular chariot races. For the common people, it was like the return of long-lost joy. Soldiers were also not overlooked. Caligula showered them with generous bonuses and privileges, thereby securing the army's loyalty. He well understood that popularity in Rome rested not only on bread and circuses, but also on the strength of arms. Even the Senate, usually suspicious of new emperors, was astonished by his apparent restraint. For a brief moment, Rome felt that it was ruled by a benevolent leader, a worthy successor to Augustus. However, this veneer concealed darker intentions. With every action, Caligula tested the boundaries of what was permissible. His open smile was merely a mask, hiding a far more ambitious and sinister design. While the people marveled at his generosity, Caligula was laying the groundwork for a more treacherous game. At the center of this new strategy were not the Senate or the army, but his own female relatives, Agrippina the Younger, Livilla, and Drusilla. In an unprecedented move for Roman history, the emperor decreed that official oaths include their names alongside his own. He ordered coins to be minted with their portraits, a privilege usually reserved for goddesses or empresses. At imperial banquets, he seated them to his right, relegating his wife to the background. But it was not so much the formalities that caused alarm as the sinister rumors. Troubling whispers began to spread through the Palatine corridors. Had the emperor crossed an unacceptable line in his relations with his close female relatives? Suetonius, known for his keen observation of the princeps' eccentricities, later recorded in his works that Caligula allegedly engaged in public stuprum, sexual misconduct, with his sisters, thereby demonstrating a deliberate disregard for the fundamental tenets of Roman society. Among all his sisters, Drusilla held a special, almost sacred place in Caligula's heart. Beyond a deep emotional bond born from shared family tragedies, the emperor began to treat her as his legitimate wife, showering her with honors and privileges inaccessible to any official spouse. Rome, seemingly accustomed to imperial excesses, began to experience genuine shock. The man once adored as a just and wise ruler now revealed his unsettling face as a despot, using transgression as a tool to consolidate his own power. Of the three sisters, Drusilla became the epicenter of Caligula's mad universe. She was not merely the middle sister, but his most trusted confidant, his constant shadow, and, according to chroniclers, his companion both in the bedchamber and in matters of state. Rumors, once whispered, turned into a deafening roar as the emperor elevated her above all women in Rome. In the heart of majestic Rome, where power and intrigue intertwined in a complex pattern, a tragic story unfolded, leaving an indelible mark on the annals of the empire. Drusilla, Emperor Caligula's sister, held a special place in his life, and, it seemed, in the very governance of the state. She was accorded honors usually reserved only for empresses. She participated in ceremonial events, her opinion was sought on political matters, and she sat beside the emperor as if sharing the burden of power. In the eyes of many, Drusilla was the de facto first lady of the empire, but fate dealt a cruel blow in 38 AD when she died at the age of just 21. Although official sources cited a sudden illness, whispers of possible poisoning or conspiracy persisted. For Caligula, this was a personal tragedy that plunged him into inconsolable grief. For several days he shut himself off from the world, refusing food and communication, and when he reappeared, he made an unprecedented decision that shocked Rome. He proclaimed Drusilla a goddess. An order was given to erect a temple in her honor. Funerals were organized that surpassed even the grandest military triumphs in their splendor, and it was declared that anyone refusing to worship her would be guilty of sacrilege. At this moment, the Roman people realized that Caligula's grief had transcended ordinary human sorrow. He had crossed a line bordering on divine madness. Rome was no longer under the rule of a Caesar, but had become a plaything in the hands of a man who imagined himself capable of creating gods at will. After Drusilla's death, the emperor's mental state underwent irreversible changes, plunging him into the depths of madness. Grief transformed into manic delusions, and Caligula, feeling the title of Caesar insufficient, declared himself the embodiment of a living deity. He ordered his effigies to be installed in all temples across the empire, demanding worship not as a ruler, but as a divine being. Artists were instructed to depict him with the attributes of various Olympian gods, from Jupiter's lightning bolts to Neptune's trident, depending on his fleeting whims. In the heart of Rome, parts of the imperial residence were transformed into a lavish sanctuary where the populace was expected to offer daily sacrifices. The slightest hint of doubt or disobedience was punished as sacrilege, inevitably leading to execution. For Caligula, worship was not merely a sign of respect, but an absolute obligation. This cult, beyond its destructive impact on the economy due to the construction of temples, creation of colossal statues, and costly ceremonies, fostered an atmosphere of widespread terror. Senators, aristocrats, and common citizens bowed before him more out of fear than genuine faith, realizing that any wrong gesture or word could cost them their lives. Most concerning was his self-justification. Caligula declared that, as a deity, his actions, including even the most outrageous relations with his own sisters, were not subject to evaluation by ordinary human laws. The emperor transformed his religious fantasies into a powerful instrument for consolidating his own power. Rome, which had once placed its hopes in him, began to feel as though it was living under the oppression of a deified despot. The veneer of virtue was cast aside. By proclaiming himself a god, Caligula set in motion a chain of events that led to the destabilization of the empire and sowed terror in every corner of Rome. The vast treasury he inherited from Tiberius, which at first seemed inexhaustible, was squandered within a few months on erecting temples in his honor, organizing ostentatious spectacles, and hosting insane banquets. In an attempt to replenish the squandered funds, he imposed exorbitant taxes, confiscated senators' property, and even held auctions where gladiators and palace furniture were sold. The aristocracy, constantly humiliated at banquets where the emperor chose wives and openly compared them, felt like hostages. The Senate, having lost all self-respect, became a spineless instrument echoing the emperor's mad whims. The people, once his support, now suffered under the burden of exorbitant hardships. Inflation, ruthless confiscations, and religious persecutions undermined the welfare of merchants and peasants, plunging them into poverty. Even the bread and circuses, intended to distract from pressing problems, could no longer conceal the widespread hunger and despair. The Praetorian Guard, which was supposed to be the unwavering bulwark of Caligula's power, began to feel growing dissatisfaction with their master. He treated them as voiceless slaves, and their commanders were humiliated with insulting watchwords and mockery, undermining their authority and dignity. In this atmosphere of widespread fear and humiliation, Cassius Chaerea, one of the Praetorians, harbored a quiet but all-consuming hatred in his heart, which would soon erupt into a full-scale conspiracy. By 40 A.D., Rome was united by an unprecedented consensus in its revulsion towards the mad emperor. Senators, soldiers, and common people all agreed Caligula was no longer a ruler, but a mortal threat to the very existence of the empire. In January 41st A.D., Rome buzzed with rumors and speculation. Ruined senators, humiliated praetorians, and frightened courtiers wove a complex web of secret alliances that had seemed impossible just recently. All agreed on one thing: Caligula's madness had to be stopped, or Rome would be doomed to inevitable destruction. The conspiracy against the emperor ripened like a storm cloud ready to unleash a deadly downpour. The plan was simple, yet incredibly dangerous. Caligula's demise was to occur during the Palatine Games, as he passed through a narrow corridor where he would be momentarily separated from his guards. It was there, in ambush, that a group of Praetorian officers, led by Cassius Chaerea, awaited him with drawn swords, ready to strike their victim. The fateful day, 24th out of January, was when the carefully laid trap sprung shut. Caligula walked with confident strides, as if intoxicated by his power and convinced of his divine status, exchanging jokes with his small retinue. He likely mistook what was happening for another theatrical performance when Chaerea suddenly blocked his path. The truth dawned on him the moment the first blade plunged into his flesh. The conspirators, driven by hatred and a thirst for justice, inflicted over 30 stab wounds on the man who had proclaimed himself a god. The emperor's blood profusely stained the marble slabs of the corridor, coloring the walls of the palace where he had so often humiliated and insulted his subjects. His wife, Caesonia, and young daughter, innocent victims of political intrigues were executed minutes later to cut off any possible dynastic claims to the throne. The living god, who had recently reveled in luxury and power, died a pathetic death, like any mortal, begging for mercy. Rome fell silent. The people, as if stunned by the sudden news, did not know whether to rejoice or mourn. The poor, who had received bread and circuses from him, remembered him as a generous ruler. The aristocracy, on the other hand, breathed a sigh of relief, freed from tyranny and arbitrary rule. The era of terror had ended, but its sinister shadow would forever leave an imprint on the memory of the eternal city.